She didn't cry. That's the first thing you need to know about Sarah. When Marcus Webb, CEO of Pinnacle Marketing Group, looked her dead in the eyes in front of the entire open plan office, 37 coworkers suddenly very interested no, their computer screens, and said the words, "Clear out your desk, you're done here." She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't even raise her voice. She just nodded, picked up her coffee mug, the one that said, "Mondays are for bad decisions," which was ironic because it was a Thursday, and she walked to her desk, packed her few personal belongings into a paper bag, and left. No drama, no scene. Just the quiet dignity of a woman who had no idea that what felt like the worst moment of her life was actually the universe setting up the most satisfying plot twist she would ever experience. But let's back up, because to understand what happened 2 years later, you need to understand what Marcus Webb actually did that Thursday morning, and why the people who witnessed it never forgot it. Before we begin, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the bell because you do not want to miss what is coming. Sarah had been with Pinnacle for 3 years. 3 years of staying late, of picking up slack for colleagues who left at 5 on the dot, of coming up with campaign ideas that senior leadership would present as their own in client meetings while she sat in the back of the conference room and smiled professionally. She had built the company's entire social media presence from scratch. When she joined, their Instagram had 400 followers and looked like it was run by someone's uncle who had just discovered the internet. By the time Marcus fired her, it had 240,000 followers, engagement rates that their competitors would have sold organs for, and had directly contributed to 3 major client acquisitions worth a combined total of around $4 million in contracts. She knew this. Her direct manager knew this. And Marcus Webb definitely knew this, because he had stood at the all-hands meeting 6 months prior and told the entire company that their digital presence was a shining example of what this team can do. And he had looked right at Sarah when he said it. So when he called her into his office that Thursday and told her that he was restructuring the digital team and that her position was being eliminated, she pushed back. Politely, professionally, she asked questions. She pointed out, calmly, that the company's social metrics had grown by over 400% under her management. She mentioned, carefully, that she had emails documenting several campaign ideas that had been presented to clients without her receiving any credit or additional compensation. She wasn't threatening. She was just, for the first time in 3 years, refusing to be invisible. And Marcus Webb, a 35-year-old man who had never in his professional life been questioned by someone he considered beneath him, didn't handle it well. He stood up from behind his desk. He told her that her attitude was exactly why this decision had been made. He said, and these are words that every single person in that open office heard, because he had somehow forgotten that his glass-walled office had absolutely zero soundproofing, that she was lucky to have lasted this long, and that he was doing her a favor. Then he walked out of his own office, pointed at her desk from across the floor, and told her to clear it out in front of everyone. 37 witnesses, the coffee mug, the paper bag, the quiet exit. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have anticipated, because men like Marcus rarely see the people around them clearly enough to anticipate anything about them, was what Sarah was going to do next. Not for revenge, not immediately, anyway. She was going to do it because she was broke. She had rent due in 18 days, and she was tired of shrinking herself to fit into spaces that were too small for her. She filed for unemployment that same afternoon. Then she opened her laptop, went to her personal portfolio website that she'd been quietly building for 2 years just in case, and she started reaching out. She had connections, not the flashy LinkedIn connections that look impressive, but mean nothing, real ones. People she'd collaborated with on campaigns, clients who had specifically asked for her by name, freelancers in her network who knew what she was actually capable of. Within a week, she had 2 freelance contracts. Within a month, she had 4. She was working from her apartment in leggings and making within striking distance of what she'd made at Pinnacle, except now every idea she had was hers. Every piece of work had her name on it. Every client knew who they were talking to. 3 months in, one of those clients, a mid-size e-commerce brand that was trying to break into a younger demographic, offered her a full-time position, Head of Digital Strategy. The title alone was a step above anything she'd ever held. The salary made her eyes water in the best possible way. She took it. She was 28 years old. She had just been publicly humiliated by a man who thought that moment was the end of her story, and she was sitting in a corner office with a team of 6 people reporting to her. She thought about Marcus occasionally during those 2 years. Not obsessively. She wasn't the kind of person who kept a list of people who had wronged her pinned above her desk. She was too busy actually building something. But she thought about him the way you think about a car accident you were in. Not with anger anymore. Eventually. More with a kind of clarity. That moment had forced her hand. It had pushed her out of a comfortable misery into something genuinely good. She almost felt something complicated in the neighborhood of gratitude, though she would never in a million years have said that to his face. Which brings us to the Tuesday afternoon, 26 months after the coffee mug and the paper bag, when Sarah's assistant knocked on her office door and handed her the afternoon's interview schedule. Her company had been growing fast. They needed a director of business development, someone who could come in and own client relationships, manage the pitch process, and help scale the agency side of the business. They'd been searching for 6 weeks. Her HR lead had put together a strong shortlist, and Sarah had already interviewed 4 candidates over the previous 2 weeks. The 5th candidate was scheduled for 2:30. She looked down at the resume in her hand, somewhere between her office door and her desk chair, and stopped walking. Marcus J. Webb. She read it twice. She looked at the work history. Pinnacle Marketing. Group. CEO. Departed 14 months ago. 2 shorter stints after that, neither lasting more than 7 months. She would find out later, though she already suspected it, that Pinnacle had not survived long after she left. When you build a company's entire digital infrastructure and then remove the person who built it and understands it, and replace them with nobody because you were restructuring, the results are somewhat predictable. The company had lost 2 of the 3 major clients whose acquisitions Sarah's work had directly supported. They had limped along for about 8 months, and then Marcus had left, officially to pursue other opportunities, which, in CEO speak, typically means the board had a very uncomfortable conversation with him. Sarah stood in the middle of her own office, holding his resume for probably 45 seconds. A lot of things moved through her mind in that time. She could have handed it back to her assistant and said they were going a different direction with the search. She could have had HR reach out and cancel the interview before he arrived. She could have sat down at her desk and spent the next 20 minutes thinking carefully about what the mature, measured, executive-level response to this situation was. Instead, she straightened her blazer, walked back to her desk, sat down, and said to her assistant, "2:30 is still on. Send him up when he gets here." Because here's the thing that separates people like Sarah from people like Marcus, the thing that he had fundamentally misunderstood about her on that Thursday morning 2.5 years earlier. She was never actually angry. She was professional. And professionalism, real professionalism, means you look at a resume and you make a decision based on what's on the paper, not based on your feelings about the person who submitted it. Also, she was deeply, profoundly human, and she was curious. At 2:27, her assistant knocked again. She told him to send the candidate in. The moment the door opened, she watched his face go through about 6 emotions in roughly 2 seconds. Recognition, confusion, a flash of something that might have been panic. Then the careful, practiced rearrangement into professional neutrality that anyone who has spent decades in corporate environments learns to do. He was wearing a good suit. He looked older. He looked, and she noticed this with something that wasn't quite satisfaction but was adjacent to it. Tired. "Sarah," he said, and then seemed to realize immediately that he probably shouldn't have used her first name. "Marcus," she said, "please, sit down." He sat. She had his resume open on her desk. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at him, then said the most professionally devastating thing she could possibly have said in that situation, which was absolutely nothing about the past. She just started the interview. She asked him about his experience with client relationship management. She asked him about his approach to building and leading business development teams. She asked him about a time he had made a significant professional mistake and what he had learned from it. She watched him carefully when she asked that last one. She asked him where he saw himself in 3 years. Standard questions. Her voice was even. Her expression was neutral. She was, from all observable evidence, simply conducting a job interview. He answered everything. Competently, actually. Marcus Webb was not an incompetent man. He was a man with a particular blind spot, a particular failure of perception when it came to seeing the full value of the people working around and beneath him. But he was experienced, and he could talk about business development with fluency. She listened. She took notes. After 40 minutes, she thanked him for his time and told him that HR would be in touch within the week. He stood up, and for the first time in the interview, he seemed to step slightly out of the careful professionalism they had, both maintained, and he said, "Sarah, I want to say—" She looked at him. She didn't say anything. "I handled things poorly," he said. "The way things ended." "I know that." She nodded once. "I appreciate that," she said. "We'll be in touch." And that was it. She didn't hire him. Not because of what happened at Pinnacle. She genuinely did not let that factor into her professional assessment because that's who she was. She didn't hire him because he wasn't quite the right fit for what the role needed, and because one of the other candidates was exceptional, in a way that Marcus, strong as his experience was, simply couldn't match. She made the decision she would have made regardless of history, and she slept fine. But here is why this story matters, why it keeps getting shared in offices and group chats and comment sections full of people who have had their own version of a Marcus, their own coffee mug moment, their own Thursday afternoon when someone with more power and less vision tried to make them feel small. It's not actually about revenge. People share it because they think it's a revenge story, and there is something satisfying about the shape of it, the poetic geometry of the man who fired her sitting across from her 2 years later. That part is real, and the satisfaction of it is legitimate, and you're allowed to enjoy it. But the actual story is about what she did between the firing and the interview. The 18 days until rent. The laptop open on the same afternoon. The freelance contracts. The corner office. The team of 6. The 2 years of building something real instead of waiting for the universe to punish the man who wronged her. The story is that she didn't need him to fail for her to succeed, though he did anyway. The story is that she walked out with a paper bag and a coffee mug and turned that exit into an entrance. The story is that when he sat down across from her, she had the power to be exactly as fair and professional as she had always been, because she had never actually needed his approval to know her own worth. That's the part that stays with you. That's the part that hits different at 2 in the morning, when you're lying awake thinking about your own Marcus, your own Thursday, your own moment of being made to feel replaceable by someone who didn't understand what they had. You already know what you're worth. You just might need a paper bag and a coffee mug and 18 days until rent to prove it to yourself.